Let's dig into this.
Yes, with someone who knows all about South Carolina law and that part of the country. Sarah Ford is a former prosecutor in South Carolina. She's joining us now. Sarah, welcome to TMZ Live.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi, thanks, y'all. Glad to be here.
Sarah, I want to give you a theory that I have, and I want to know what you think of this. So, had the prosecution asked for the death penalty, the jury would know that during the trial. And given that, it seems to me that because you don't need to prove motive, but because the motive here was a little tenuous, that it's some kind of a financial exposure, that he was about to be exposed for his financial misdeeds, that seems a little tenuous. Maybe if the jury felt that this was a death penalty case, they might not have been so willing to convict because all of a sudden motive is on the table.
Because
that seemed a little
weak.
Death
penalty wasn't there. It was easier
to convict.
Right.
So the way that works is the trial happens in one stage, and then the jurors would have to decide about the death penalty in a completely separate stage. So the first would be guilty or not guilty, and then the state and the defense would be able to put up evidence regarding the death penalty, and they would have to decide that. So, I'm not completely convinced that the financial motivation was the exclusive motive in this case. I mean, I think that Alex Murdaugh, certainly fooled everyone, lied to everyone, stole from clients, the most vulnerable people. But, he was literally trying to protect his image, his family's legacy. He's what some of us would call a family annihilator. So I do think the financial stuff certainly plays in, but I think it's even deeper than that.
Do you think that the jury, to Harvey's point, sort of like the fact that the jury knew they're not sentencing this person to death,
that was off the table,
that it's off the table, that it was easier for them to say, yes, he's guilty, and he's going to be in prison for the rest of his life?
Absolutely. I mean, I think anytime, you're seeking the death penalty, you're looking at the most heinous of the most heinous crimes. And I certainly think that asking for the death penalty would certainly be more, way more heavily on the minds of the jurors. I do think it was probably easier on these jurors because they're looking at all of the evidence that they have, and they're not the ones that are inflicting or deciding what the punishment will be. And that makes it a little bit easier for jurors because their job is guilty or not guilty. The judge decides. But, when it comes to the death penalty, the jury has to make that decision. So it does make it easy.
And that might have been tough. Are you processing what the judge said the way we are? Because the way we kind of interpreted it, Charles and I, is that it seems like he's saying you guys should have asked for the death penalty.
I don't know that that's what he was saying. He is going to follow the law. He's going to, it's not the judge's determination to seek the death penalty or not. That's entirely in the purview of the prosecutor. But I think it was a good message to, the Attorney General's office and to other prosecutors in the state regarding cases like this, particularly because, Alex Murdaugh's family ran Colleton County and the Lowcountry for almost a century. And that the death penalty was certainly people were sentenced to the death penalty in that courtroom, as he said, for lesser crimes for a lot of years while his family was in power. So it was really ironic to think about that the way that he described that.
Yeah, no kidding.
So the things that the prosecution presented, that the jury, this was almost like, yes, we have to get this guy now because there have been so many misdeeds. And I know they're supposed to say it's just about this particular crime, but it's like they finally had Alex Murdaugh there in court, and this was we're going to get him now.
I understand what you're saying. I get it. And I think that people, you have to look at the totality of things. But I think after watching this trial for the past 6 weeks, seeing what that jury saw, hearing the evidence that came from that witness stand, and most importantly, hearing from Alex Murdaugh himself, the evidence was absolutely there to convict him for this crime. And a lot of people have disagreed with me over the past few weeks about that. But this jury, saw through his lies. And that video at the kennel, he just couldn't get around that. Yeah. Lying about that last moment that, moments that he saw his wife Maggie and his son Paul, and lying about that within hours, and knowing that it was important to lie about that. Who would know that? Well, the murderer would know that. So.
Absolutely. And I guess that's the final question. If Paul Murdaugh would not have recorded that on his cell phone, and you didn't have that, because it seems to me one of the reason that he testified was because he had to, because now you have this video, he had to explain himself, otherwise they would absolutely convict him, and that was a Hail Mary. If they didn't have that video at the dog kennel, what do you think would have happened? Would he have been convicted? Would it have taken him longer? Do you think they might have been hung? What do you think?
I think it would have been easier for the defense to poke holes in the case if he hadn't testified the way he did. A defendant doesn't have to testify. I'm sorry, he wouldn't. I don't.
Yeah,
he would never have testified if there was no audio from that dog kennel. So let's assume he didn't testify. There was no audio placing him there. What do you think would have happened? Do you think the jury would have still convicted him? They would have done it, maybe taken longer? Do you think it would have hung jury? What?
I think it would have taken a little bit longer. I do think that, excluding the video, I think there was still strong evidence, especially when the OnStar data from GM came in the middle of trial. That really, for me, like, okay, all right, we've got some really strong evidence here that he would have never known about. So I do think that video, really, they called Paul the little detective. It was really ironic that is the one thing that I think really put the state's case over the top. I think they could have gotten there without it, but it certainly would have been more difficult, and I think it would have taken longer.
It's really interesting, isn't it, that one of the victims of this heinous crime essentially is the one from the grave,
right,
who nailed him.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's so good having you on. I mean, it really, because everybody's so interested in this. You clearly know your stuff, and also you're from there.
And South Carolina.
Really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thanks, y'all. I appreciate y'all having me on today.
All right.
Really interesting.
Yeah. Really, I mean, everything about this case is...
That's just fascinating.
And I wonder if, and I just know this from watching the documentary, there are a lot of people who still want Alex Murdaugh to be tried for other things. The housekeeper... The family of the housekeeper, they want to know what his involvement was.
Well, now that you know a lot about him, this housekeeper, it seems like this was not just somebody falling down the stairs.
Right.